over it. Uh, you may be in a relationship with a person, and if you are a survivor of molestation, and that person may touch you a certain, is that all right if I touch you, brother? It touch you a certain way, and you re-experience that boom.
Wow.
That's good.
You kind of follow that whole piece, and so it's the re-experiencing of that trauma, and then from an emotional from a psychological, cognitive standpoint of view, you could have been told that, hey, you're not as bright, you're not going to amount to anything, the emotional abuse, and then you're in a situation, maybe in class, and there's you're reading something, or you might hear that the teacher saying, well, everybody else have it, but you don't have it. You re-experience that boom or whatever, just from a cognitive standpoint. And then from a spiritual standpoint, it happens a lot. You're on this spiritual journey, this formation of trying to understand God is who God is, and then your church begin to question it because you're differentiating yourself from this process. John Gottman talks about the process of differentiating. And then around the differentiating, when you separate yourself from your church, there's some grief that takes place in this process. And then you decide, well, I'm going on this journey, and I become spiritually homeless. I'm a spiritual refuge. And then you decide to, she's saying hallelujah, thank you, Jesus. And you run into someone that you put your trust in, and it does not work out the way that you think, and then you re-traumatized again. You experience that boom. So that's according to some of the literature that we've read.
What are some physical signs of depression in black men?
Physical signs of depression, according to the DSM-5, one of them is isolation. One of the criteria, the symptoms, anger, feeling hopelessness. Anger is a big one because that's the way that we tend to fight as men, just as black men, and more so, it's more so in white men. It's just not highlighted. But we respond, we fight with our hands, oppose with our heads and our hearts, and being able to articulate what we're really feeling, becoming vulnerable and transparent, and finding out. I'm 61 years old. I begin to find out about 50 that I'm stronger as a vulnerable person than I am as more so than an angry person.
That's good.
And so that's something that I bumped into at one of my epiphanies.
Strength and vulnerability.
Yeah, strength and vulnerability.
I think I love the fact that you say vulnerability, because I would agree with you. I do some work on vulnerability myself in terms of leadership and being a vulnerable leader. And when I think of men are our leaders, and I agree that sometimes they may see vulnerability as a weakness, but it really is the biggest powerful tool that you have once you put yourself in that place, and when you really understand what being vulnerable really means. Then I think then it creates a bigger power. So I love that you said that, which kind of goes into my next question.
Well, can I say this?
Yes, please.
Tapping into my strength of vulnerability, it reduced my blood pressure. I was able to sleep better at night. I mean, because I was able to step into a space. I'm a feminist too. I believe in feminine power. And that's because I was raised by my grandmother also, and I just seen how strong she was, and her ability to operate in this vulnerable space and have such influence. And so, yes, there's a lot of truth to that. And I believe the vulnerability and being transparent has really saved my life in a lot of ways as a black person. Yeah.
Because when you can tell yourself the truth,
Tell yourself the truth.
tell yourself the truth, it goes a long way. And then all the other things that we use as excuses can no longer hurt us or harm us, because I know the truth and I get it from the source. So man, I'm just like so excited right now, because I love that. And I think that's so important that we keep in mind, particularly as men. And I'm not a man. Never, I don't understand the experience because I'm not a man. But I do understand the importance of being vulnerable and telling yourself the truth. And I'm not sure if that's always something that is available. That's not what I would think most men are taught. Go ahead.
And just put pepper in there again.
part of our truth that we need to come into alignment in is who we are.
And so I'm gonna flip the conversation and kind of ask a question along those lines. So we talk about secondary trauma. Like we've been talking about men who've experienced trauma firsthand, but as a whole, we've experienced secondary trauma when you have events like Trayvon Martin, Philando Castile. You know, that trauma. What is that saying to black men about who they are, and how do they deal with the system saying who they are? If that makes sense.
I think that's a good question, and I like, and going back to Trayvon Martin, and the phrase that you call it secondary, we call it vicarious trauma. And vicarious trauma is like it's not really you that's experiencing, or even someone that you know, but because of the color of Trayvon's skin, and that could have been one of our sons, and like Barack got on television and said that could have been me. That's vicarious, that's secondary. And it was a reminder as a black man, as a black man, as a grandfather, when I look at my grandson that's 22 years old, look just like Trayvon, wear the hoodies, I'm thinking like that could have been him. And I begin to have these conversations with him about being safe, how to respond and how to react when you're triggered. And watching where you're going in places like that. So the vicarious trauma is very real. It's systemic too, and it affects us. I know it affected me as a father and as a grandfather.
Because we always say, no matter how successful, or I've heard this thrown out, that no matter how successful you become as a black person in general, at the end of the day, for example, Michael Jordan, at the end of the day, they're going to see you as just a black man.
Yeah, and along with Michael Jordan, Michael Jackson said it best. They don't give a damn about us.
Right.
In one of his songs.
So how does that frame how black men in general, carry themselves when it comes to their family, their position in society? How does that help me with this, George?
In these observations you guys are making, you're actually making the point that I keep trying to make, that you can't get there from black. Where you're trying to go, you can't get there as long as you either have to redefine what black is or toss it out. Because what you're doing is to bar off of what my brother said over here, we're manifesting our own dysfunction. We're walking around with these fears that, we look like this, and we know that we're going to be on the negative end of that. Well, if that keeps in your mental loop, eventually it becomes a spiritual process, and lo and behold, there you are again. There is a behavior associated with identity that we have to start taking conscious control of. Depression is about a state of mind. It's about what is that thought process that keeps looping in your head. Well, if the thought process is they don't give a damn about us, he looked just like Trayvon, that could have been my boy. If that's our thought process, how is that empowering us to change our circumstances? How is that doing that?
So in other words, you're enabling yourself.
We're perpetuating it.
Yeah.
That's what the race construct is designed to do. It's not designed for one person to push the load. It's designed as a systemic process.
And that's where the challenge is. Finding that language, knowing how to react to that. But then you find out that you are a gatekeeper, and you continue to perpetuate this color issue. And so when you're talking about, black men and trauma, it's one of those, it's a tightrope, because we understand that there is this, when you talk about this critical analysis, this theory about where we come from and who we are, how do we frame that, and how do we talk about it over this podcast, George, without getting shot? Really, on the serious.
No, that's straight up.
Yeah, the serious. Well, without being blackballed, and because this is a conversation that, going back to the church, that the church really needs to have. Myself, as a mental health professional, need to have this conversation as I sit with people of color am I just advocating and perpetuating the system that's already been put in place? Or what nugget can I really give that person that they can take with them? And they feel like that they've been free, they've been liberated, they have that aha moment.
That's so good because
Yeah.
it really is a conversation that churches need to start having. But I think there's a fear that if they have that conversation and the people become empowered, then they no longer have a place.
Most definitely.
And well, that also is, as reality based as that may sound, puts the power into their hands rather than us claiming our own power. The church is only going to be a reflection of its community's mindset. The church will be there, but it's based on what we're going to do. You said something a minute ago, even though we don't know how to have relationships, we're still going to have one. Right? So you can either do it consciously or unconsciously. And it's time for us to be conscious about our spirituality. Our spirituality is our most powerful tool.
Oh my God.
They recognize that. We don't. See, we are because our spirituality is through this lens of color.
And you got Reverend Holland trying to tell us this is the way we should go, and I'm advocating this system.
Ain't nobody following.
No, we recognize it, but we operate under their fear.
Right. We're operating under their fear because that is the code. You're right. I like how you said that. So, it's really time for us
I
to
don't
put
even know
our...
if we really recognize it. I feel like that's a whole nother show.
That's another show.
Because
Yeah.
we have taken on what we have been given. We have not even done the research ourselves to find out what was our true religion per se.
What was our ethnic?
What was our, what did we really believe? No, we took what they gave us and it became ours and we ran with it. And it's sad to say, and some of my listeners, but me and Tia have this conversation all the time.
All the time.
It keeps us in bondage. It really does. It keeps us to a degree. It keeps us oppressed, and that's why I said to you that they don't want to have that conversation because if you empower the people, we preach to people's pain. We don't preach to their empowerment.
Now, see, that's where the rubber meets the road. People that are running systems, they understand the connection between emotion and profit.
Oh my God!
Okay, so the more we can get you in your emotions, the result, the resolution, the solution is not even relevant. I went to church and I got caught up. I got pent up. I'm good. Write the check. Our current president is a master at creating emotion to rile you up in frenzies, right? So emotion sells.
Thank you.
And the work that Dwight and I are trying to do is give you a mental tool to counteract when someone is subconsciously trying to control you emotionally. Right. And the work that I'm doing in the race construct is the identity you choose is heavily emotionally loaded. When you challenge somebody's racial identity, because there's a difference between racial identity, which is a color, and culture identity, which refers to ethnicity, geographic location, and all those activities. Two difference. One's got a lot more meat on the bone than the other. Okay? When you learn to separate those differences, then you can't be manipulated by mainstream economic forces.
That's the truth.
All right? But and when you take that emotionally loaded title, you are now continually re-inflicting yourself. You don't even realize it. Black man, as a black man. What good stuff so far in this conversation has been positive about black men so far? We haven't talked about anything positive. One of the questions I always ask in my workshops is, name one quality of life area that, as black men, on a collective basis, because you're going to have your pockets of success, but on a collective basis, in areas that you need to survive, whether it's education, employment, finance, health, wealth, judicial, law enforcement, that we as black men outperform any other racial or cultural group in. Just give me one of those areas. Not basketball, not music. Not basketball, not music. I mean, areas you need to survive. What area, as black men on a collective basis, do we outperform statistically any other